very much get stuck in the position you're in the country you're in and not see outside of that. You can be very much in a bubble, and so you might think that every child has the same opportunities that your child has because of that, but that is not necessarily the case. So many children are sort of lost. You know, they don't have those opportunities, and a lot of the ability and potential that's there, it's just sort of never realised because they're not in a position to do that. Many children have to become adults at a very, very young age in order just to survive.
Yeah, and that's so interesting coming from an American perspective, because I think in a really minute way, Study Abroad gave me that, just being able to see that my own perspective, I was sort of instilled from a young age that was absolute, you know, the viewing of the other was just instilled in how everyone, I feel like, around me was raised. But just getting that, stepping outside was invaluable, and starting to view that not everyone can do everything. You know, growing up, you're told you can be anything you want, and you start to think, is that true? You know, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's, I really struggle with this idea that it's possible for everybody to reach their full potential, particularly when so many people have such difficult circumstances conspiring against them. You know, and when you live in a world where capitalism is viewed as the only way of doing things, there are many victims of that will not be able to do what they want to do. And I feel like we need to sort of readdress this. We need to relook at it and think, actually, you know, are certain people benefiting more and more at the cost of many others not being able to succeed? So I think that it's just trying to see things in a different way, as opposed to, I think, you know, it's very difficult now, I think, looking at, you know, being in England and this whole, you know, coming out of the EU thing, for example. That, you know, majorly has, you know, it's okay the government backtracking to a certain extent now, but, you know, they've tried to sell it on an immigration issue alone. And yet many people in this country will not realise that, you know, any protection in the workplace that they have is only there because of us being part of Europe. They wouldn't have that. So even though I have my problems with Europe at the moment, especially with the current refugee crisis, and it is a refugee crisis, so, you know, let's forget about immigration because it's not actually really about that. It's about something else. And also it's this use of words as well. So again, we're back to that idea, you know, what does a word conjure up? And if you project a word in a particular way, then what does that do to how people think about that, or how they think about other human beings? Because they start to not see them as other human beings as well. That's what actually happens.
Yeah, the dehumanization is that's so prevalent, I think, and especially with the refugee crisis.
And I think we haven't addressed things historically, and if you don't address that, it doesn't go away.
It's so, you know, you hear over and over again, history, you know, if you don't address it, history repeats itself, but it is so obvious when you talk about things like that. I think we kind of get blinded to it thinking, oh, we're being radically accepting in so many ways, and we're changing. We're not as homophobic as we used to be, and, you know, feminism is rising, but when you put it in those terms, it's so obvious that...
But also for who? Because if you actually look at the newspaper, you see, like, you know, there's been an increase in anti-Semitism.
Oh, yeah.
And things like that. So it's not, so actually, where is the acceptance? You know, and it's the same with feminism. You know, what does feminism mean for many women who are sort of excluded from that conversation? And there are many that are excluded from it. So, you know, what can happen is you can get through the door, but you can close the door behind you and not allow the other people to come through, or not give them a key to be able to get through and follow you. And I think that you have to constantly be aware of that in these areas that people get involved in. I think you have to understand that there's always somebody else. And if you don't deal with those issues, or you don't talk about it, it doesn't make it go away. And you might have made great steps forward, but you'll find yourself being dragged back. Because, you know, if it becomes acceptable for other groups to be demonised, then you will end up back joining those groups as well. So it's complicated, but I think we have to, you know, you have to constantly keep yourself in check and and keep on top of it really. And I think that it's very easy to get in a position and then think, oh well, I'm okay now.
Stop working.
So it doesn't matter about the others. You know, I was one of the others, but now I'm sort of I'm in sort of mainstream, so it's fine. But you know, I think that can change, and it can happen really, really quickly. I mean, genocide can happen like that. You know, it's not something that necessarily takes decades and decades to develop. It can happen very, very quickly. You know, at this moment in time, there'll be some people somewhere who are improving their lives because they're the others, in inverted commas.
That's so interesting because I think that, you know, you can try really hard to fight that, but it's just, I feel like I always sort of spring back to that sort of judgmental viewpoint, even trying to be conscious of it. Do you feel a lot of guilt about that? Because obviously you're so aware of it. Do you feel like sort of trying to fight that tendency all the time? Or
it's just, I just find I just think it's really exhausting because you can't take it for granted that people know things. That's the other thing, you can't. I think it's very easy to be in a situation because you know, if I take my own community situation internationally, or even just from a European perspective, if you're involved in that debate, and you're part of that circle that's involved in that debate academically or in NGOs or whatever, you can end up having quite an insular way of looking at it. And then what you can end up doing as well is excluding. So you'll go on about being excluded and then you do exactly the same thing as well. So and also you can develop a conversation that actually in the real world starts to not have any sort of connection with that in a sense. As well.
Oh, okay.
So it can become about other things, and it can become about doing things, but maybe not actually that are going to directly actually have an influence or an impact on the people you're actually supposed to be helping. I think that's the other thing. So then it becomes about trying to change that dynamic in some way. So for example, you know, we had Decade of Roma Inclusion from 2005 to 2015. Did it change anyone's perception of Roma or Gypsies? I don't think so. Probably the perception's probably worse now than it was before it started. And also, you know, the whole. So it's complicated, but I think you just have to keep looking at. You just have to keep looking at it. You do have to keep thinking about it, and then approaching it in a different way. You know, because things are constantly in a state of flux as well. You know, things change. You know.